Hello, good Monday to you. Happy freaking Monday to you. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are listening to Damn Radio this Monday morning, and I'm glad you're here. And frankly, I'm glad I'm here. And the weather seems to be cooperating a little bit with me, which I like. It's been an interesting weekend, though. Lots of news, lots of protesting, lots of Olympics, lots of sporting events. But I've been working or recovering. It seems like I have a lot of things going on, and so therefore I've been a bit busy. I had to paint a ceiling yesterday. That was about the extent of any hard labor, and then I painted the walls the day before, and so try to keep myself, I don't know, somewhat active doing something. No, not that I don't work. I work my little tail off for the most part. I've been, I've been following so many things, it's hard to tell where I wish to start. I think I want to start with Hungary and Viktor Orban. He said yesterday, or I think it was Saturday actually, it just got translated to us on Sunday. He said that Ukraine is going to be considered, that if they're, it's basically if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And he, in a speech, said that they were very quickly moving toward the realm of enemies. Not just not with us, they are our enemies. And it's for a lot of reasons they were talking about this. Orban has been against this from the very beginning. He's against them being in the EU. There's talks all about the horror story of Zelensky and the Verkhovna Rada were also not happy when Ruta was there speaking last week, when he indicated that even if after the conflict is done and there are Western or European so-called peacekeepers sent in, and they were targeted by Russia because Russia says that is unacceptable for European or American troops to be stationed in Ukraine. Just probably like we would say or have said that you can't let China and Russia be in Greenland or Cuba or anything like that. That if Western troops were in Ukraine and Russia attacked them, that would not indicate that Article 5 of the NATO Charter would be, they wouldn't consider that an attack on the country of origin of the soldiers, if that makes sense. And, well, it does make sense, and I get it, and people were not happy about that indication. And Zelensky has been trying to kill the peace deal ever since it started. There's been a bit of an effort to have some kind of a counteroffensive. Now, I think it's because a lot of weapons have come their way because they were basically out of everything. And then in recent last couple of weeks, and a couple of indicators, the use of Starlink by Russian forces has been terminated. Unregistered use of Starlink has been terminated by Elon Musk. And so that has apparently led to some issues on the ground for some Russian areas of the front. It doesn't mean they aren't still beating the snot out of Ukraine in many places. It just means that it's harder. They got to do workaround and maybe level the playing field a tiny bit, because Russia's been beating the snot out of them. And Ukraine over the weekend was bombing the heck out of Russian infrastructure as well. And Zelensky gave a speech. There was also an assassination attempt on a high-ranking Russian general. And so, all kinds of news today. I wanted to start with telling the whole story instead of just the snippets of Orban. Excuse me. So European officials have been, and Zelensky have been trying to derail peace in Ukraine ever since it was first started. They don't want peace. They want Russia to, have a ceasefire so they can restructure everything that they wish to do in there, regroup, send new soldiers in. There's been now the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine has now authorized the use of military weapons against people to be mobilized. It used to be they didn't have any of that. They'd just beat the crap out of them and throw them in a busification van. And now they are authorized weapons. That's great. Wonder when the first person is going to get killed there. And that's what Orban was people have been talking about as well. And it's Western heads of state have been acting like nannies to Zelensky during his talks with the U.S., said Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. And in an interview with Georgia's Rustavi 2 channel, that showed on Sunday, Szijjártó said Ukraine's European backers rallied to prevent Trump from pressuring Zelensky to agree to a peace deal with Russia. European leaders accompanied him like nannies. It was humiliating for Zelensky. It was obvious to outside observers because his caregivers would not let the patient go alone. If you are the leader of a sovereign country and you are invited somewhere, you don't take 6, 8, or 10 other leaders with you, said Szijjártó. He said that the entourage traveling with Zelensky was a very bad look. Multiple media outlets said that Prime Minister Starmer and French President Macron coached Zelensky. Now, remember that when that came out a while ago, coached Zelensky on how to repair relations with Trump, kiss his ass, basically, following their explosive argument at the White House in February of 2025. Leaders of UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Finland all accompanied Zelensky during his subsequent visit in the U.S., so he argued, Szijjártó, that Ukraine's European backers had convinced Zelensky to walk away from the first peace talks with Russia nearly 4 years ago. And if an agreement is made now, it will clearly be worse for Ukraine and worse for Europe compared to what was agreed upon and signed in April of 2022. And last year, the EU denounced Trump's peace plan, which called for Ukraine to withdraw troops from the Donbass and make territorial concessions. They don't want to end the war. They want it to continue, and they want to force Russia to give Ukraine back the Donbass because they got a lot of money tied up in that. And the bet is that if the U.S. will continue to try to force that issue, that they can get those rare earths and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Apparently, that was a big bitching point over the talks here in the last few days. Well, last week, I mean, that they've been talking about. And that Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant needs to be turned back over to the Z monster, and a couple of other, territorial concessions. Zelensky's been saying, and he said it again over the weekend. I mean, he's trying to tank any chance at settlement. There's also talks of a huge Russian deal in the works with the United States worth trillions, is what the general newsworthiness in other countries is saying, and that is something to keep an eye on if that turns out to be accurate. Lavrov, for his part, Sergei Viktorovich, he spoke and said he had an interesting. I listened to his speech the other day. He was given he gives them all the time, so I don't remember exactly which one it was I was listening to, but he said that the U.S. wants to take total control of the energy supply of the world, and that's what their actions are. That's what they're doing right now, and they have to resort to this coercive measures in order to push for economic dominance. Now, anybody who knows, and I'm going to tell a story, another story I read over the weekend that really tends to. I disagree with this kind of. Scenario, this kind of putting things out. I just don't like it. It's not friendly. It's not world friendly at all. And it's, I don't think it's a good look for an American president to do stuff like this. And I really don't. By the way, the ICE, everybody protested over the weekend about ICE protests. That's, I'll let JR tell those stories. That'll be a lot of fun for him, I'm sure. And I do plan on listening. So you want to talk about real international flavor, though. Elon Musk says he's going to plan a self-growing moon city, a city on the moon. Now that's international, isn't it? Got to finish my coffee before it gets too cold. Anyway, the U.S. is trying to take control of all international energy supply routes in an attempt to attain global economic dominance once again, said Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. During his speech at the World Economic Forum, he said, Donald Trump has claimed that he made America the hottest country anywhere in the world in terms of business activity. He called the U.S. the economic engine on the planet, said, you all follow us down, you follow us up. Remember when Trumpster said that? So, in an interview with TV BRICS Media Network Monday, ahead of a celebration for February 10, Lavrov said the U.S. objective to dominate the world economy is being realized using a fairly large number of coercive measures incompatible with fair competition. As part of the push, the Americans want to take control of all the routes for providing the world's leading countries and all continents with energy resources. Now, it doesn't take a genius to say that he's right. He's absolutely right. On the European continent, they are eyeing Nord Stream, which was blown up 3 years ago, the Ukrainian gas supports a transportation system, and TurkStream, said the minister. So there's efforts to take all of those. Lavrov also referred to the sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft. The war against tankers in the open sea is waged by the U.S., which announced an oil blockade of Venezuela, kidnapped the oil-rich company's president, Nicolas Maduro, in January. They are trying to ban India and other partners from buying cheap, affordable Russian energy resources. Europe has long been banned, and he is forcing them to buy U.S. LNG at exorbitant prices. All true, by the way. All absolutely true. Trump has repeatedly threatened secondary sanctions and tariffs on countries purchasing Russian energy. Now, if you take it from a business point of view, if you want to play, what do you call it, corporate takeover language, Trump is a corporate raider, and you can maybe honor that kind of thing, I suppose. Frankly, I don't. I don't like that kind of stuff in corporations, just like I don't like it with countries. But at least in business, when you argue that that's all because of money and people in search of a good return for your investor class and a healthy bottom line, that's not everything you're supposed to consider. The only thing you're supposed to consider in politics. You're supposed to have some sort of country equality or the proposition that you're not going to kill and capture leaders of another country. And people have been doing that for generations, by the way. We're just the latest empire to do so, and that's reality. So, with the U.S. creating artificial barriers for trade and energy, the BRICS nations are forced to look for additional secure ways to develop financial, economic, integration, logistics, and other projects, said Lavrov. And so BRICS is coming up again, where they are talking about those sorts of things. Did you see the U.S. relations are really not in a good state? Okay, so Trump had to when Vance was at the Milan Olympics opening. Okay, and this was a couple of days ago. The Team USA were coming out and being cheered, and they were. Then they showed the camera on the big screen. Showed J.D. Vance, and he was booed. So U.S. President Trump expressed surprise after hearing that J.D. Vance was booed at the Olympics opening ceremony in Italy. The Winter Olympics opened on Friday with the traditional Parade of Nations at Milan's iconic San Siro Stadium. Team USA entered the stadium to applause, but when the camera briefly showed Vance and his wife Usha waving American flags, booing began. And I've got we can watch it on X, but oops, those are a lot of boos for him. Whistling, jeering, some applause. Not a long shot for him on the screen there, CBC commentator said on the live feed. And the video quickly went viral. So Trump on Air Force One said he hadn't seen the broadcast but found the reception surprising. That's surprising because people like him, he said, adding that Vance is in a foreign country. In all fairness, he doesn't get booed in this country. In my 22 Olympics, it probably has happened, but I sure don't remember it. Longtime USA Today sports columnist Christine Brennan wrote on X. Some people suggest the frosty welcome was linked to public discontent over recent U.S. policies. U.S. and EU relations are quite strained since Trump returned to office, marked by trade disputes, tariffs, digital regulation, Ukraine, Trump's threats to take over Greenland, and domestic unrest over Trump's aggressive immigration enforcement also appears to have spilled over into Italy. Hundreds protested in Milan on Friday against the presence of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement personnel assigned to provide security for the U.S. delegation. That was weird. Okay, why in the world are we sending immigration enforcement to Italy? I don't know. Vance was not alone in getting booed. Team Israel received a frosty welcome. They had anticipated a hostile reception due to Gaza and global support for Palestinians. The Olympics will run from February 6th to the 22nd. 13 Russian athletes will compete under neutral flags because Russia's Olympic Committee suspension over Ukraine, a decision Moscow denounces as political, as do I. It's, not, it doesn't happen, but it happens, nowadays. We cancel. We still have that cancel culture. And it's nonsense. I disagree with it completely. And if you aren't inviting all of the Olympians of the world, how in the world can you pretend that you've won? It may, if you don't compete against all comers, then you don't compete. That's not a competition. It's nonsense. And the Russian teams are usually, pretty solid, So we have nannying. We have nannying in the Olympics. We have complaints against that. We have Zelensky trying to kill the chances for Russian-Ukraine peace. That where he was, this is by Nadezhda Romanenko, who's a political analyst, and a decent article. And I don't know if you heard about it, but maybe you have not. But Lieutenant General Vladimir Alekseev, who's the first deputy chief of Russia's main intelligence directorate, is Zelensky's latest desperate bid to sabotage emerging Russia-Ukraine-U.S. negotiations in Abu Dhabi and prolong the war, which he wants to do. When negotiations gain traction, spoilers surface. That's negotiation 101. And this week's second round was precisely in Abu Dhabi, was precisely the kind of movement that unnerves actors who fear ballot, reform, and accountability more than the inevitable defeat on the battlefield. This is obviously the Zelensky regime. The target choice reinforces this point. Alekseev is the second in command of the GRU chief Igor Kostyakov, who sits on Russian delegation in Abu Dhabi. Striking the number 2 as the number 1 shuttles between sessions is a very deliberate message and an attempt to rattle Russians' delegation, inject chaos into the decision loop, force security overdrive, and ultimately to provoke Moscow's withdrawals from the talks. There's already rumors that Russia's going, this is BS. Why in the world are we here? Nor is this the first time theater is tracked with diplomatic motion. Recall the attempted drone strike on President Putin's Valdai residence in 2025 that coincided with particularly intense U.S. and Russia exchanges. You don't have to be a cynic, like I am, to see a pattern. Whenever a diplomatic door cracks open, someone tries to slam it shut with explosive drones or bullets, and then retreats behind a smokescreen of denial and proxies. It's called plausible deniability as a policy. Why would Kiev's leadership gamble like this? Well, let's start with the raw political incentive. Vladimir Zelensky extended his tenure beyond the intended March 2024 election under martial law. We're almost 2 years into that, right? March is 2 years from when elections were supposed to take place and never did. And then May will be the 2 years where a new president was supposed to be in, and he's still there. If hostilities wind down and emergency powers are gone, the ballot box looms. There's been talk that that Trump wants and the American side wants some kind of a deal and elections forcing the Z-Man out, which is basically what's gonna happen. Everybody knows it, but they'll twist it and claim that he won. They'll stack the elections and stand with guns at the ballot boxes or something. His standing, Zelensky's, has eroded amid war fatigue, unmet expectation, and massive corruption scandals that are swirling around his administration that infuriates many Ukrainians and have dealt Zelensky's image a huge blow. End the war without a narrative total victory, and he risks owning a very messy peace, a grueling reconstruction, and a reckoning at the polls. Facing voters at a stadium famously worked well during Zelensky's initial presidential campaign, but now endlessly moving the goalpost is his only hope of clinging to power. That's absolutely true. Then there's the strategic logic of spoilers. Negotiations compress time, clarify trade-offs, and create deadlines, none of which benefit Ukrainian maximalists. If an agreement would force Kyiv to accept hard limits or expose fissures with its more hawkish backers, creating a pretext to stall makes sense from a narrow survival lens. A brazen hit inside Moscow during talks does exactly that. It dares the Kremlin to harden its stance, fractures trust at the table, and lets Kyiv posture as unbowed while keeping the wartime rally framework at home. Even if direct authorship can be obfuscated, at least on paper, because nobody will buy claims that Kyiv had nothing to do with it, the practical effect is what counts. You know, of course, Ukraine is saying, oh, geez, we didn't have anything to do with it. But where'd one of the people run off to? Ukraine, naturally. You think they'll be found there? No. Predictably, Ukrainian defenders will object. Kyiv has every incentive to keep U.S. support flowing, so why risk alienating Washington with an operation that screams escalation? Because incentives are not monolithic. They're filtered through domestic politics, factional competition within security service, and the temptations of a successful spectacle. And remember, spoilers don't have to be centrally ordered to be useful. A wink, a nod, a green light to make pressure can travel a long way in wartime bureaucracy. Also, his party, Zelensky's, is soon to be one short of having they'll need a coalition. They can't do it unilaterally, his party, because they've lost so many and there can be no elections to replace him. So they're bleeding now, not only men on the front line, they're bleeding people in the Verkhovna Rada. So the most important thing for Russia and the U.S. at this stage is to firewall talks from bloody theatrics. For the negotiation process to provide real results, it has to be built to survive shock. There's already talk of Russia going, screw this, we're out, because the shocks will keep coming. That means insulating prisoner exchange and humanitarian work groups from headline provocation, revalidating military deconflict channels, and demanding verifiable behavior change rather than trading barbs about attribution in the press. The larger point is simple. If we let every well-timed bullet dictate the pace of diplomacy, we're outsourcing strategy to those who fear peace the most. That's the Z monster. The Alekseev attack fits a familiar script. Choose a symbolically loaded target, hijack the narrative, and hope negotiators flinch. The right response is the opposite. Call the bluff, keep the calendar, raise the cost of sabotage by refusing to let it reset the table. Zelensky's regime may calculate that its political survival depends on endlessly throwing up a hurdle for peace and calling it resistance. If so, the fastest way to test that proposition is to keep pressing at the negotiation table. Talks are not a favor to one side. They're a filter that separates leaders who can face the end game from those who can only survive in the fog of not yet. I liked that article. And that's very true, by the way. Z-Monster can't afford to be taken out of power, financially either, but he's got to maintain the power or the war would be over, no doubt. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of stronger, more warlike people than Zelensky. He's no longer the Boy Scout wearing a green T-shirt. Now he's switched to black. Have you seen that? Everywhere he goes now, it's no more the green nasty T-shirt. It's now the black with even a black. He wears a black coat and a long sleeve shirt all the time. But he's still. It'd be nice to see a little bit of variety. He's still trying to claim, this wartime dressing, I suppose. Crazy, crazy world in which we live. Did you hear about the Canadian, get this, France too. France and Canada are sending what? They're moving into Greenland. What have they done? Canada and France have established consulates in Greenland. So, nobody's had them before, but now they're making, so the French and the Canadians have have opened consulates there. Amid a rift between the U.S. and, Europe over the U.S. wanting to seize Greenland. Now, to be fair, Trump hasn't been going crazy over it this week. He's switched to Iran. They've already seized. And it's pretty funny. What have we heard about Maduro recently? Anything? I imagine they'll let that go, and then they'll say they'll just let him and his wife, retire to some place with a stipend from the U.S. government. Somebody will kill them in their sleep later on, and everybody will move on as if nothing happened. And that we didn't go in and overthrow yet another country and steal all their oil. That's just how it goes. Throwing Venezuela back an additional set number of years as well. We aren't doing them any favors with what we're doing, by the way. But Canada and France have established their consulate in Greenland, and Trump recently reiterated, last month, strategic island. He wants it to become part of the U.S. He cited supposed Russian and Chinese threats. Both Moscow and Beijing, laugh about, what in the hell are you talking about? Most of the world agrees, what are you talking about? Nobody's trying to steal Greenland. Denmark, along with several other European nations, reject the Trump administration's push to take possession of Greenland. And on Saturday, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand met with her Danish and Greenland counterparts, Lars Løkke Rasmussen and Vivian Motzfeldt in Nuuk. During her visit, she opened Canada's new consulate in Greenland's capital. The Canadian diplomat reaffirmed Ottawa's support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Greenland and of the Kingdom of Denmark. That was quoted by the Foreign Ministry. A day earlier, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, maybe it's Barrot, I don't know how you say that in French, I don't speak French, officially assumed the office of French Consul General in Greenland. A statement by the Foreign Ministry noted that France is the first European Union country to set up a consulate general on the Danish-governed island. France reiterates its commitment to respect for the Kingdom of Denmark's territorial integrity. Last month, Denmark launched a military exercise in Greenland, with Germany, France, Sweden, Norway, and the UK sending symbolic contingents of up to 15 personnel each. And Germany sent 5 and then took them home. It was, kind of a, that's some serious military exercises, right? After several European leaders, including French President Macron and UK Prime Minister Starmer, reaffirmed support for Denmark last month, Trump threatened Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and Finland with tariffs. The president dropped his threat shortly thereafter, saying he agreed on the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland with Secretary General Mark Rutte, with no details forthcoming. Last month, Rasmus Jarlov, the chair of Denmark's Parliamentary Defense Committee, said Russia and China pose no threat to Greenland. An assessment echoed by EU Transport Commissioner Apostolos Tzitzikakostas. I know I didn't say that right. Tzitzikakostas. Tzitzikakostas. Oh, sometimes international flavor has a hard time with names from Denmark or the EU Transport Commissioner Apostolos. It sounds Greek to me. Tzitzikakostas. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov similarly said Washington is well aware that neither Russia nor China has any plans regarding the island. Yes. Isn't that nuts? The Socialist Party in Spain has no support. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party suffered a major defeat Sunday in the Aragon regional election, while right-wing parties, right-wing. You ever notice that it's always right-wing if you are conservative? You're a right-winger. You're some kind of crazy lunatic on the far fringes of reality if you are a conservative. But if you're a liberal, you are well-meaning and highly intelligent and all kinds of stuff. A normal person. Of course, you cancel the rest of the world. We cancel the rest of people by calling them names. That's what we do. And now the right-wing parties are making substantial gains and underscoring the government's weakening support across the country of Spain. The Conservative People's Party won 26 seats, falling short of a majority, taking 34% of the vote. Sanchez's party dropped to 18 seats, the worst ever regional result, with only 24% support. While right-wing Vox doubled the number of its seats to 14, coming in third. Aragon, often called Spain's Ohio, is viewed as the barometer of the national political mood. This is not the result we hoped for, said socialist candidate Pilar Alegria, who had resigned as education minister to run in the regional vote. Aragon now faces an uncertain horizon. Sunday's vote was the first of 3 regional elections scheduled in PP-held areas of Spain, to be followed by Castilla y León in March and Andalusia in June. PP and socialists framed the Aragon election around broader national issues. PP portraying it as a referendum on the prime minister, whose coalition has also been hit by scandals, naturally, involving his party and allies. The prime minister's personal popularity has also been dented by corruption involving 2 of his closest aides and his wife. Wow. The election campaign in Aragon, and this is going on Europe-wide. The reason I'm telling you this is because this is happening all over Europe. The election campaign in Aragon, and some say it's a result of the Trump kind of nationalist, make America great sort of thing, right? So this northeastern region Aragon has about 1.3 million people. And it has been dominated about debates over Sanchez's plan to legalize 500,000 immigrants. Opposition leaders reacted with fierce condemnation of this, framing the move as irresponsible. PP leader Alberto Núñez Feijóo accused Sanchez of attempting to deflect attention from a mounting national crisis following a series of recent fatal passenger train accidents that left dozens dead. And Vox leader, and by the way, this seems to be the pattern everywhere by the far left. Maybe you call them your left-wingers, right? You import people from foreign countries, just like we did in the United States during the Biden, hopeful of stealing the elections for generations to come, bring in a whole number of illegals, give them all kinds of freebies, let them immediately sign up for things like Social Security or get some kind of a status to keep them here forever, or a piece of paper that says come in 3 years and we give them the ability to work. And then you have imported your own voting bloc in huge proportions. So recent EU elections, just like we said, have seen other invasions replacing local populations, right? Recent EU elections see a surge in this right-wing and conservative support, and I have to throw in the right wing just because that's what everybody else does. Just to make, I'm doing it to make fun of it, kind of. Driven by concerns over immigration, economic uncertainty, political scandal. In the 2024 European Parliament vote, France's national rally led with 31%. Far right. Austria's Freedom Party topped the polls. Germany's AfD made significant gains. Right-wing parties also strengthened in Belgium, Italy, and Hungary. Yep. Criminal gangs have been branded enemies of Italy for being Olympic protesters. I'm not going to share that story, though. I just thought the title was entertaining. Now, Russia says that here we go again. And think about this. Here we are with more foreign NGOs plotting a coup in Belarus, a new color revolution to take Belarus out of the sphere and away from, because Lukashenko is one of the strongest supporters of probably the strongest supporter of Russia, and to turn Belarus, switch away from Ukraine for a minute. The two largest countries outside of Poland on Russia's western border are Belarus and Ukraine. And if you can flip Belarus with a color revolution and a coup on Lukashenko, which wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And that's a cool country. My only time there, first time there and only time, was in the summer last year, 2025. And a pretty cool country. Plenty of history over there. And pretty I don't know. I don't want to say modern, but, everything. It's a Western, very Western, lots of new stuff. Western NGOs are preparing a new wave of anti-government protests, though, in Belarus that are going to be timed to coincide with the 2030 presidential election, says Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. An attempt to overturn the result of the 2020 elections led to violent clashes throughout the country, but order was eventually restored. According to the SVR, Western sponsors were disappointed in the leaders of the riots and are actively looking for new people to try and topple Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. The quote is this: NGOs in Western nations, including democratizing structures, agencies, and foundations in the U.S., as well as Britain, Germany, Poland, and other European nations, are building up assets to again attempt to destabilize the situation and change constitutional order in Belarus. In order to achieve a color revolution, Western organizations are taking the shock of opposition activists in Belarus, the SVR said. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the central figure of the 2020 protests, and other people currently based in Lithuania and Poland, have demonstrated in the past year an absolute inability to influence political processes in their home nation in any way, said the agency. So the SVR does not expect Belarusian citizens to support any foreign destabilization operation because they have seen the example of Ukraine, Moldova, and other nations destroyed in the name of Western geopolitical ambition under the slogan of calling for protection of democracy and human rights. Now ponder that for just a second, that statement. the examples of Ukraine, Moldova, and other nations destroyed in the name of Western geopolitical ambition, under the slogan of calling for protection of democracy and human rights. I suppose one of the, how people say these days, how'd that work out for you? How's that working? Yeah, we got democracy. Trust us. We have democracy in Ukraine, right? Democracy exists. It's there. Not really, but there it is. Corruption is definitely there. War is definitely there. NGOs were definitely there. And, fomenting all this crap forever. For 30 years it took them to do this. And how do you do it? You change the language, you change your history, you change your school, what you're teaching in schools, and you bring up an entire generation of people, children, that don't know their own history. And they've done it. They're doing the same thing everywhere else. The warning follows a thaw in the relationship between Lukashenko and Donald Trump. In recent months, Washington secured the release of dozens of Belarusian activists who had been sentenced for their roles in 2020 riots. The freed individuals included Tikhanovskaya's husband, Sergei, who was barred from running in the 2020 election and jailed for inciting insurgency. Since his release, he had prodded supporters with video statements complaining that they were failing to donate enough money to anti-Lukashenko causes. Last October, the Lithuanian government downgraded Tikhanovskaya's state-provided personnel security, which was initially offered due to her supposed status as the legitimate head of Belarus. Her office said she may be forced to move to Poland because of this, which Lithuanian Prime Minister Inga Rudzinina said was political exile's personal business, adding, "I see neither benefit nor loss here." She stressed that the Belarusian opposition is larger than Tikhanovskaya. That's true. That is true. Let's see here. Let's talk about Moldova for just a second. With the formal withdrawal from the CIS underway, Moldova is facing mounting economic and political pressure amid unresolved questions about where it stands in Europe. Yeah, Moldova officially will no longer be a CIS member. I told about this a couple of months ago. The process has already started. We made this decision recently, and we are currently moving through approval stages. And by mid-February, we will finalize the process in the government subsequent to this decision to be taken by our fellow deputies. So as Moldova moves to withdrawal, the decision marks a dismantling of the economic and political framework that has underpinned the country since independence, even without any binding European alternative. Presented in Chisinau as part of an irreversible turn toward Europe, the move reflects a strategic wager whose implications extends beyond symbolism, with mounting economic and political consequences already shaping the country's trajectory. Tell you what, could be frightening. In January is when they announced this, and they're trying to get out of the CIS. And I mean, they're going to do it. They're gonna be out of it and face west is what the plan is for that. Let's see, I had a couple more I wanted to share with you. Where on the Lavrov end? I wanted to share a much longer story that is pretty, well, it's damning to me. But before I get that, I wanted to talk about that the shooter has put out a video. Remember, I told you a little bit earlier in the show about trying to kill Vladimir Alekseev, the number 2 in Moscow. The prime suspect in the shooting, because he actually did shoot him, Vladimir Alekseev, through his vehicle. And Alekseev was in the hospital in stable condition. The main suspect in the assassination attempt confessed to investigators that he acted on the orders of Ukraine in an interview released earlier today, Monday. Well, in Russia, it's 8 hours ahead of us. Alekseev, the first deputy chief of Russia's ministry, was shot Friday in a communal hall of his residence in Moscow. Prime suspect Lyubomir Korba was arrested in the UAE at Russia's request and transferred to Moscow over the weekend. Kiev denies involvement. Now, before I finish with this story, though, I was quite interested in the UAE extraditing on Russia's behalf he's a Russian citizen, but a lot of people have dual citizenship. If they have Russia-Ukrainian ties, they can have dual citizenship. And they do. A lot of people have U.S.-Russian citizenship, and they can be part of either country. You just got to obey the laws in both and pay your taxes in both and all kinds of stuff like that. But it's pretty rare for the UAE to extradite people. When's the last time the UAE extradited, a terrorist to the United States? Doesn't happen. And I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's pretty few and far between. And so here, I think it signals kind of a larger change in the way the world is going. Could be wrong, I don't know, but it's an interesting point. Alekseev, the first deputy chief of Russia's military intelligence, was shot Friday in footage published by Russia's FSB. The 65-year-old Ukrainian-born Russian citizen said he was already on Kiev's payroll and was promised $30,000 for killing the general. Korba stated he was recruited by the SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, last August and sent to Moscow to surveil several targets and receive $2,000 monthly from Ukraine. He said the order to prepare a hit on Alekseev came in December. After the assassination attempt, I was instructed to go to the airport and take a flight to Dubai. In Dubai, there was a ticket to Romania. From Romania, I was supposed to be taken to Kiev. My group of handlers, led by a general, was supposed to meet me in Kiev. The FSB alleges Polish Special Services assisted the SBU by involving Korba's son, who is a Polish citizen. Korba's acquaintance, Viktor Vasin, who helped him rent an apartment, was arrested in Russia and confessed to knowingly aiding the Ukrainian plot. A third suspect, Zinaida Serebritskaya, also born in Ukraine, has fled Russia. She traveled to Turkey on the eve of the shooting and is now in Ukraine. How about that? Yeah. I'm keeping my eye on that one. That's an interesting story. And not the first. There's been several successful assassinations inside of Russia, carried out by the Ukrainian security services. And people allege that the Ukrainian security services had something to do with that Crocus concert shooting, festival shooting. Couple 3 years ago. The UK has given Russia every reason to view it as a party to the Ukraine conflict. I watched so the Russian ambassador to Britain, his name is Andrei Kellen, and he allows himself to be interviewed fairly frequently in Britain, and I like to watch it. It's always in English. He's well spoken. I try to watch him when they come out and get his take on current events and the things that he is saying, and he was pretty brutal in this one. He said that the UK has given Russia every reason to view it as a party to the Ukraine conflict, including by deploying troops to Ukraine, said, this past week. Britain's involvement is deep, reflects a strategy of containing Russia. This interview was published earlier today. Britain provides Kiev with political direction, supports it financially and materially, shares its intelligence, arms, and trains and fights alongside Ukrainian armed forces and other militarized structures. We have every right to consider London as a de facto party to the conflict. Now, he's not alone in saying this, that they've been parties to the contract or the conflict for ever since it started, and frankly, all the way back to 2014. Britain has a lot of money in Odessa. They've put tons of money into that port city. They want to have access to trade from there, exports of Ukrainian things through the Black Sea to England, through the Bosphorus Straits, and through Turkey and all of that, and around and into England, to give them an alternative route. And they want to have, as does the United States, presence in the Black Sea. And Russia is very much against that. Turkey is too, frankly, but it's he said that they have every right to think that there are British troops in Ukraine. The presence of active duty troops in Ukraine from Britain is now openly acknowledged, as shown by a service member's death last December while observing Ukrainian forces test new defense capabilities, said the Ministry of Defense. London avoids confirming combat roles, said Kellen, but there are many ways to present incidents in a relatively decent light. British veterans served as mercenaries in Ukraine, also inspired by media rhetoric and the government's message that Kiev needs to be supported in every way. Russia has long said that a lot of the traffic over the radio that they hear is in English, U.S. English and British English. It's they were there, especially in the very beginning. The U.S. had a lot of people there. Kellen described Moscow-London relations as long being strained by successive British government antagonism, using Russia as the boogeyman to distract from domestic issues is alienating voters from mainstream parties, he suggested, and pointing to the rise of Reform UK. Interesting side note for you. Do you know what the boogeyman is in Russian? Baba Yaga. And it's kind of a witch, and it could be several things, like the boogeyman, a witch, and they show Baba Yaga. She's not very pretty, but sometimes they show that it's basically a witch. So there are plenty of witches running around. So I wanted to share with you, and it's a pretty long opinion piece. Who is this by? It didn't have a nice byline, so I think it's a staff article. Here we go. Sviatoslav Kyazev and Anastasia Sakharina. Let's see. This article has to do with torture, murder, ethnic cleansing. And if you don't know who the impetus of this is these are radical nationalists that collaborated with Nazi Germany and left a bloody legacy celebrated in Ukraine today. In early February 1929, 97 years ago, a group of Ukrainian political emigres gathered in Vienna to formalize what they believed was a movement of national liberation. What emerged, however, was not a campaign for statehood, but a radical organization that rejected democratic norms and embraced political violence. Members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists took part in Nazi Germany's aggression against Poland and the USSR, carried out mass killings on ethnic and political grounds, and conducted sabotage operations for the Third Reich and later for the West. Those members of the OUN who survived and could not flee to the West faced criminal charges in the USSR. However, many were granted amnesty by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in an effort to promote internal reconciliation in Ukraine. So, this article examines how the OUN developed into a militant movement whose actions during and after World War II, nice history lesson to give you a backdrop of Ukraine, and a controversial historical legacy, which is being embraced right now by many, many Ukrainians as very positive, like the Banderovs, who killed 120,000, I believe the number was, of Polish citizens in Lvov. Nonsense. And so now these Ukrainian nationalists are being given, nostalgic for affirmation, I suppose you would call it. So the history of Ukrainian nationalism is brief. The term Ukrainian is not used and wasn't used until the late 19th century. According to historians, the idea that, and I've said this forever, the idea that Ukrainians were separate from Russians was seized upon by the Austro-Hungarian authorities, who recognized the anti-Russia potential. In contrast, Gallican Russophiles who advocate for unity between Carpathia's region and Russia's face severe repression from Austro-Hungary. During World War I, Austrians actively promoted Ukrainian nationalism to recruit volunteers for their own army. So, like I say repeatedly on this program, the wars in Europe have been going on for centuries. And Russia has always been the boogeyman on the far right, and being as huge as they are, and have always been. And they haven't started any wars. Find one that they started. Just please find one. So they want to, if the Austria-Hungary Empire could use anti-Russia potential and create a separate Ukraine. I told you before, na krajach Ukraj, which is basically the on the edge, on the frontier, right? Ukraine is the frontier, but they were still Russia, and they had a mix of languages over there, and the people, overrun by Poland, overrun by Turkey, overrun by Genghis Khan, for God's sake, it's been going on forever. So. This history is not something that we should be involved in. Historians note that amid the revolutionary events in 1917 in Russia, Ukraine nationalism became a political elevator for various public figures. The nationalists argued for the necessity of creating an autonomous political space within what is Ukraine, formed the Central Rada, and tried to persuade Russia's provisional government to grant them authority. And following the October Revolution, they proclaimed the establishment of the Ukrainian People's Republic. UPR leaders liberated and armed Austro-Hungarian prisoners of war to suppress uprisings by local residents who supported leftist movements. However, the nationalists fled Kiev when Bolshevik forces approached the city. Later, the German command engaged representatives of the UPR for negotiations in Brest. And Brest is such a cool country. Fortress area right in between Poland and Belarus. It was, talk about history over there. I spent a whole day just wandering the fortress inside of Brest. Wow, that was cool. And if you haven't ever had a desire to see something like that, tell you what, you could be missing out. The German authorities considered UPR representatives unreliable, ineffective, linked to criminal activity. One day, a German patrol entered the Central Rada's meeting hall, arrested suspects, and dispersed the others. The new appointee of the German administration was a former Tsarist general Pavel Skoropadsky. However, following Germany's defeat in World War I, his regime collapsed. Former political figures of the UPR, headed by Simon Peltoura, then seized control of the UPR. After suffering a defeat at the hands of the Red Army, Petliura's followers fled to Poland, promising to cede western Ukraine in exchange for assistance against the Bolsheviks. But as a result of the Polish-Soviet War, much of modern Ukraine was under the control of the Ukrainian SSR, while Poland took Galicia and Volhynia without granting any concession to Petliura's faction. Petliura fled to Europe and was assassinated on May 25, 1926 in Paris by Samuel Schwarzbard in retaliation for atrocities committed by nationalists against Jews during the Civil War, and a French jury acquitted Schwarzbard. With the leaders gone, Ukrainian nationalists that managed to flee abroad formed radical organizations. On January 28, 1929, they convened in Vienna for a Congress of Ukrainian nationalists, also known as the First Great Assembly. They agreed to fight for Ukraine's detachment from the USSR with the aim of establishing a national dictatorship. The participants declared the formation of the Organization of Ukraine Nationalists and elected former Austrian officer and Petliura's ally Yevgeny Konovalets as its leader. The Congress concluded on February 3rd. The Congress formalized a radical movement rooted in extreme nationalism and rejection of democratic principles. Yevgenia Tarniagrina, a methodologist, Museum of Victory, said in an interview, according to historians, Ukraine nationalists were dissatisfied with the fact that they had no independent state in which to legally promote their own ideas. Rather than addressing problems by fostering political dialogue and human rights advocacy, they turned to violence, conspiracy, and ideology of integral nationalism, where the nation's interests were superior to individual rights, and terror is viewed as an acceptable and even desirable political tool. Konovalets quickly established ties with German intelligence, which became particularly strong after Hitler came to power in Germany. Ukrainian nationalists promised to support the Nazis in their aggression against Poland and the USSR. Following the terrorist attack orchestrated by the OUN at the Soviet consulate in Lvov on October 21 of 1933, Soviet intelligence decided to neutralize Konovalets, and on May 23, 1938, Konovalets was killed by NKVD agent Pavel Sudoplatov. So, under the banners of Hitler and NATO, shortly after Konovalev's death, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists split into two factions. Emigrants in Western and Central Europe wanted to see Konovalev's relative, Andrei Melnik, as a leader of the organization, while militants from the nationalist underground, operating in Poland and later in the USSR, backed the radical Stepan Bandera. Ultimately, this division led the two factions, known as OUN-M, led by Melnik, and OUN-B, led by Bandera. Both Melnik and Bandera were recruited by Nazi intelligence as agents. In 1939, Ukrainian nationalists, as part of Hitler's forces, took part in the invasion of Poland and were subsequently redirected by German intelligence to engage in espionage and sabotage against the USSR. Under the direction of Abwehr, Roland, and Nachgal battalions were formed, and they were made up of OUN members and took part in Hitler's aggression against the Soviet Union. Additionally, OUN members joined mobile groups serving under German and carrying out punitive operations during the operation. Some members of the Bandera faction soon developed political ambition and attempted to declare their own state under the protection of the Third Reich. Coupled with the lack of discipline and widespread corruption, geez, that sound familiar? Within Bandera's ranks, the idea considerably irritated the Germans. They curtailed the autonomy of Ukrainian nationalists, reassigning former saboteurs to police units and placing Bandera under arrest. However, the Nazis did not completely abandon the idea of using nationalists for their own purposes. Bandera supporters played an active role in mass killings of Jews, most notably during the Lvov pogroms, the Babi Yar massacre, and other brutal actions against Jewish populations. One of Bandera's aides, Roman Shukevich, who had previously worked for the Abwehr, served as a Hitlerist auxiliary police and took part in punitive operations in Belarus. After resigning, he returned to Western Ukraine and helped establish the armed wing of the OUN called the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, which he headed. UIA militants launched military actions against Soviet partisans and began systemically killing Polish citizens. Estimates suggest the death toll from these ethnic cleansing, known as the Volhynian massacres, could have reached up to 200,000 people. At the same time, UIA militants eliminated Ukrainians that could have supported the Soviet regime following the arrival of the Red Army. Entire families, including elderly parents and small children, were brutally murdered. These might have been the first nationalists in history for whom the lives of their fellow countrymen meant absolutely nothing. Alexander Makushin, an expert from Russia's National Center for Historic Memory, said at the same time, OUN members were involved in forming the SS Galicia division and separate SS police units that conducted punitive operations. And following the defeat of the Galicia near Brody, many of the fighters fled and joined the UIA. In 1944, the Third Reich realized it would have to relinquish territory to the USSR. The German authorities released Bandera from custody and intensified cooperation with the UIA. Shukevich was provided with tens of thousands of firearms, ammunition, money, and trained saboteurs for operations against the Red Army. As the front advanced, the nationalists attacked districts and region centers, looted shops and pharmacies, assaulted draft offices, After the defeat of the Third Reich, nationalists established contact with intelligence agencies in Britain, the U.S., Italy, and West Germany and received support from them. And so, basically, this is the story of how a century of political violence is linked to the atrocities of today, because there's plenty of them going on as well inside of Ukraine. I find the history of all of that, to me, is very telling on what's going on today. And yet, and like I always say, an indication of why we, America, should not be involved in any of it. None of those disputes are ours, and we have nothing to do with any of them. I wonder if I have the content that I wanted to play for you. Couldn't find it. Where did we go? There's the Trump story, but I wanted to get remember I wanted to tell you about the moon city Elon Musk plans to create for us all. But I'm missing one of my stories, and it's depressing to me. Where is it? Remember I told you about the Hungarian before. There's a great deal of uproar. I'm going to summarize the story for you because the Hungarians, there's a large overlap between Ukraine and Hungary of citizenry on both sides of the border, right? And so there are plenty of Hungarian national people living in Western Ukraine. And they get mobilized too. And one of the hot stories that is, what would you call it, going viral recently is the story of the Ukrainian citizen, Hungarian national that was very, very sick. He had health issues, big time health issues, and he was mobilized anyway at gunpoint. Mobilized, sent to the front within a very short period of time, 2-3 weeks. He was sent to the front, and he died not by getting killed. He died of the same problem that he warned them about. He had a breathing problem, lung problems, and he was not healthy. And they mobilized him anyway, sent him to die, and he did die, but not from war results, but from health conditions, because it's more important to mobilize, even temporarily. I mean, maybe he could have held that ground a little bit longer for them, unable to breathe. But Budapest is pretty upset with this. So Ukraine's forced mobilization has become an open manhunt, with civilians being detained and forced into military service against their will. Again, it was Peter Sajarto that he commented on the detention in Ukraine of a Hungarian citizen who attempted to help a group of Ukrainians cross the border because the people were fed up with fighting. The Ukrainian people do not want to die. Yet every day there are images of violence playing out like a TV series. Open manhunts unfolding on the streets of Ukrainian cities, he wrote in Facebook yesterday. Now, I also told you they're changing the rules and allowing them to use weapons to shoot people that don't want to go. They're able to shoot them now. They're changing the rules. Ukrainian authorities recently reported detaining a Hungarian national. The country's consulate general in Beregova provided immediate consular protection. Ukraine's recruitment drive has grown increasingly brutal amid its military setbacks and manpower shortages, with hundreds upon hundreds of documented cases of draft officers using force to seize men off the street, and multiple reports of death among conscripts. The case clearly shows that the war must be ended as soon as possible, said Shajarto. This violent spiral must be stopped immediately. He said, Ukrainian men, a grandfather, a father, a brother, a son, a grandson, were desperately trying to flee the country to avoid conscription, deployment to the front in what he described as likely death. Ukrainian border guards, he said, were using every means available to catch those attempting to escape. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban said last week that Budapest would not accept Kiev's arrogant attitude toward Hungary and its people, and that his government would not tolerate forced mobilization of ethnic Hungarians from Ukraine's Transcarpathia region. Orban said the issue would be raised at the EU level and that Hungary would support the families of ethnic Hungarians who died in the fighting or after being mobilized. Budapest has repeatedly called for a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine conflict, urged an end to Brussels' warmongering policy of continuing to support Kiev military and financially. Moscow says the Kiev government and its backers in the EU and UK are willing to fight until the last Ukrainian. Hard to believe anything other than that 4 years in. It's coming up 2 weeks from now. Well, tomorrow it'll be 2 weeks. It'll be in 2 weeks, February 24th, it'll be 4 years solid of this conflict with no end in sight. No end in sight. 1 million Ukrainians dead. 10 million gone, left the country never to return. At least 10 million. Some estimates double that amount. And peace talks sabotaged, as we've discussed here on International Flavor. There's still repeat bombings and plenty of other dastardly deeds being committed on behalf of keeping Zelensky in power when the people aren't behind him even any longer. The only ones that are for him are people outside the country. People in the country are not. All the polls indicate that there's no way he would win in an election, a fair election. All the polls say that his likability is way down. You know, he was upwards of 72% of the population with his Man of the People Party in 2019. And he'd be lucky to get the alternative of that, like 28%, you know, if it was the elections were to be held today. Well, that was the last of my cold coffee there. And I tell you what else did I want to give you the opportunity to hear today? From my history, there was plenty of crazy news that I watched. I'm going to share some music with you before I leave. And there's been plenty of critical energy hits over the last week, frankly, on both sides. But in Ukraine, Russia is attempting to isolate with lots of hypersonic missiles, with lots of drone attacks, the critical energy infrastructure in Ukraine. And I told you last week about the power plants number 4 and 6 being completely destroyed inside of Kiev, and people only being granted a little bit of time with the power on. And now and they tried last week too, but there have been several hits on substations that would take out any ability for power supplies from the western parts of Ukraine and from Europe to reach Kiev as well. They're trying to isolate it. Russia is. Now, there have been a little bit of, in one area of Ukraine, in Zaporizhia, there has been a bit of a counter attack, a counter movement, I suppose you would call it, in a couple of the cities that have been somewhat effective, reported from everybody. And like I told you earlier in the show, that has to do with Starlink, according to many. Well, I think that's going to end the show for us. I wanted to play a song on the way out the door, and I like this this city, if it's the correct one, or the city, this music, if it's the correct one. Here it is. I'm going to try to play it here and get it for you. I kind of like these sorts of concerts and stuff. I told you I went to in Uzbekistan. Went to some people I don't call it. I call it electronic music. I don't know. Some people call it trance or something like that. I like some of the electronic, but this one's vocal in it as well. And so on my way out the old door, I'm going to share this with you. Ashley Wallbridge, song called City of Angels.